We knew they were coming, but few expected Donald Trump's tariffs to go this far. Stock markets have plunged. China has retaliated. Strategic concerns have been heightened right in the middle of an election campaign. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Week one of the campaign saw a Prime Minister stumble off stage, an opposition leader confirm he wants to live by Sydney Harbour, and ongoing arguments about hip pocket help. Anthony Albanese kept his focus on Medicare, Peter Dutton was focused on his promise to cut fuel excise, and there was a rush to be first to announce plans to take the Port of Darwin out of the hands of Chinese owners. Whether much of this is grabbing the attention of disengaged voters is unclear. One man who's certainly cutting through, Donald Trump. His tariff decision was a huge moment. Markets are still reeling. Australia got off lightly compared to the rest of the world, but there are serious concerns now about an all-out trade war between the US and China and a strategic realignment in our region, which has been particularly hit hard.
Here we go. Wow. Well, the election campaign is in full swing.
It's an exciting day. Very exciting. Yeah, very good.
Come on in. Here we go.
I feel I'm on a roll now.
What could go wrong?
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day.
Donald Trump dropping a tariff bomb on the world.
How can anybody be upset?
Armed with his tablet of Trumpian trade truths, he listed America's biggest targets.
Australia has copped the lowest punishment, 10% tariffs on all our exports to the US.
This is not the act of a friend.
This is a bad day for our country.
Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple.
A reciprocal tariff would be 0, not 10%.
And they're wonderful people and wonderful everything, but they ban American beef.
Any impact it has on American consumers is obviously going to also affect Australian producers.
News Big Macs could cost more with tariffs on Aussie beef imports left a bad taste.
No! No!
I just need a little, toothpaste.
Adam, good morning.
Good morning. We're on the big questions today now. Global trade or local toothpaste?
We should be detaching ourselves from Donald Trump.
What we need is a relationship reset.
But what happens if I lift this button up? Is that good or bad?
And we are finally putting America first.
I want to make sure that we can stand up for our country's best interests.
We'll defend Australia's interests.
The deal is there to be done.
We don't want a deal at any cost.
It depends. If somebody said that we're going to give you something that's so phenomenal, as long as they're giving us something that's good.
Will critical minerals be our ticket to a tariff carve-out in the months to come?
Oh, look, we will continue to negotiate.
There is a pathway for a deal to be done, the basis of which will be critical minerals and our defence relationship.
What we don't do is, under pressure, make comments about defence being on the table.
Well, we're not trading anything away. We want to enhance the relationship.
A lot of good things happen.
Markets are open and you might want to turn away.
China has hit back today, announcing an extra 34% tax.
US stocks are tumbling.
Like a bug in a rug.
Pretty good at that. Yeah.
Must have been bone dry, was it?
Please protect us from Team Trump.
Do I get the 25% a litre discount yet or not?
Not yet.
Bye-bye.
A reminder, Insiders is extended to 90 minutes each Sunday morning during the campaign. And my guests this morning are the Nationals leader David Littleproud and Foreign Minister Penny Wong. First, let's check what's making news. Labor is today promising to subsidise household batteries to help bring down power bills. Homeowners, small businesses and sporting clubs would receive a 30% discount on newly installed batteries, saving them around $4,000. The plan would cost $2.3 billion and the Prime Minister says it would save the average household around $1,100 on their annual electricity bill. Stop the students. Peter Dutton was up early this morning to promise he will cut foreign student numbers by 80,000 places. That's 30,000 fewer than Labor plans to allow in next year. Universities would each be given a cap, limiting foreign student enrolments to around 25% of their overall intake.
So this is a very significant step that we're taking. It is all about making sure that we can do what we can to help young Australians get into home ownership more quickly, and how we can help with the rental crisis that Labor's created as well.
The Coalition did oppose Labor's attempt to cap foreign student numbers last year. And in the 9 newspapers, David Crowe reports the dad vote has moved back to Labor over the past 4 weeks. Polling from Resolve shows the number of men backing Labor has jumped from 42 to 50%. We're going to start this morning with the fallout from Donald Trump's tariffs and how this affects the election contest here. The immediate debate is centred on what Australia can and should offer to change Trump's mind. The bigger questions are how reliable the US remains and how much all of this strengthens China's hand. Some of our neighbours were amongst the hardest hit by the Trump tariffs, and this will change the region. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined this week by Niki Savva, Tom Crowley and Jennifer Hewett. Very good morning to all of you. Look, Donald Trump's made a lot of headlines, we know, but this one is one of those truly historic moments, what he's done with tariffs. Niki, what does it mean for Australia?
Well, in the very short term, hopefully not all that much, because it's only 10%. But the danger, obviously, is if the trade war widens, if America continues, if America falls into recession, then drags the rest of the world down with it, then obviously Australia will suffer as well. So it depends how long Trump is prepared to persist with this policy, how much damage is done, not just to the US, but to the rest of the world.
I mean, you say how long he persists. It's a good question. Have a look at what he's posted on Truth Social. To the many investors coming into the United States and investing massive amounts of money, this is the key bit, my policies will never change. This is a great time to get rich, richer than ever before. But Jennifer, at the same time, he's also suggested he's open to offers, spectacular offers. Is he up for negotiation?
Oh, well, this is just part of the kind of complete contradiction of this policy, which has everybody guessing in the world, certainly stock markets, totally on edge. It's been much more dramatic. Yes, of course, people did expect that there would be tariffs, but this has been much worse, much more damaging. Even if he decides to back off a little bit, which is possible, of course, let's not forget he's believed in tariffs for 40 years. He really, really does believe in it.
This is in his DNA.
Yes. So I think, but even then, so much of the damage has already been done, and it will take a very, very long time to unwind anyway. So I think we're in for very uncertain times.
Tom,
yes.
I mean, as Niki said, whether this becomes a bigger trade war is the real concern for us. Are we already seeing that? China's already responded to this.
Yeah, China's the big one. They retaliated very quickly. We'll see some more from the European Union as well. But that's the thing. I mean, the reason that this isn't a big deal for us in a direct sense, there are two of them. We just don't sell that much to the Americans, first of all. And we got a better deal, that 10%, than, just about every country. Or at least sort of no worse deal than any other country. So those two things mean the direct effect is small. You could make the flippant argument that Kevin Rudd's time would have been better spent lobbying for an exemption, or at least a partial exemption for China. Tariff us if you must, but it's the China thing. I mean, China is our major buyer, right? And when you add up the tariffs from Trump 1, kept through Biden and now into Trump 2, plus a couple of extra threats that were included in the Trump package for China, we could be looking at an effective average tariff of close to 100% by the end of the year from the US on China. That's doubling the price of Chinese imports into America. Good luck to the American consumer, but if that means that China has to scale back its production in addition to whatever the retaliatory tariffs do to China, terrible.
We might get some cheaper Chinese goods in Australia as a result, but our market, and put a lot of our similar markets, it's nothing like the US market for them.
Absolutely not. And the key thing really is China's demand for us, to the extent that they keep buying commodities for their
but I think they'll divert all of their exports elsewhere. They're much better prepared for this than American consumers, or in fact much of the rest of the world. I think they'll have a plan, and they'll also be kind of stimulating.
So this is really detaching the United States from the global trading system.
Yeah, which is not. Of course, that'll have very big impacts. But all I'm saying is, I think China will be very focused on how to kind of make up for that, and they've been preparing for it.
I want to come back to the strategic question too about countries like Indonesia and Vietnam and so on in our region, because they've been punished here, and there are concerns about how they're going to move more closely to China as a result. But let's come to the campaign here, what it means for the contest we're right in the middle of, Niki. Let's have a look at some of the reaction. The Prime Minister was measured but still quite critical of what Donald Trump's done here.
President Trump referred to reciprocal tariffs. A reciprocal tariff would be 0, not 10%. The administration's tariffs have no basis in logic, and they go against the basis of our two nations partnership. This is not the act of a friend.
Was this the right response?
I thought it was, yes, and I thought they seemed to be very well prepared for what was coming. One of the really interesting aspects of this campaign, I think, is that there are 3 leaders fighting out this campaign, and only one of them is definitely not Trump. And that would be Prime Minister Albanese. I think Dutton is kind of caught between 2 constituencies here, and he's having trouble negotiating between the 2. So yes, I think the Prime Minister was prepared, and he seemed pretty divisive. Now, how much we can actually withstand what is coming is another question.
And we'll come to Peter Dutton's reaction to it, but Tom, the PM announced a 5-point plan to help industries affected. One of these points was a critical minerals strategic reserve, details TBC. What is that? We dig them up and stockpile them.
Yeah, I think it's sort of manganese, tungsten, vanadium and various other things that I faintly remember from sort of year 7
better
chemistry.
than me.
But the idea is that these are valuable minerals for a lot of tech applications, artificial intelligence,
and defence.
Yep. And defence. And so that's why the Americans are so keen on them. And we seem to have very large reserves. Getting them out of the ground is another question. But the idea is that, China is the other place that you can get a lot of these things from. So could we say to the Americans, we'll buy them from us, and then,
And it's because of China's dominance of this market, Jennifer, that you've got your scepticism about all of this talk of us
I do
providing
have
critical minerals.
Great scepticism. I mean, the fact is there's absolutely no business case, which is, and China, partly because it's manipulated prices, but that's why there's nothing going on at the moment. We have all these ideas and projects and promises, but actually there's nothing going on because there is absolutely no business case. And despite the fact we already have a strategic minerals pact, or a critical minerals pact with the US, there is no US money coming in. So I'm not sure how, it's a bit of a fantasy. It sounds good, but in the terms of practical effect, unless something dramatically changes, is minimal.
I do think, though, it's important to say that the fantasy is one that Trump does seem to be quite attached to, and the government did feel it was making some progress, at least selling this idea to the Trump team in the week or so leading up. I think they felt that they were getting close, as did the Brits, and that they were sort of front of the queue for an exemption, but then it was sort of, Mr. No Exceptions Navarro who won the argument and nobody got through. So the conversation's not finished.
Well, Peter Dutton also thinks critical minerals should be on the table, but that's not all. He also suggested defence would be central to any resolution of this with the United States.
The core of an arrangement between us and the United States in resolving this matter will centre around the defence relationship. We have troops in the north of our country, we have the AUKUS deal, we have the ANZUS treaty, we have enormous capacity to contribute to the United States in a very uncertain time, and providing assurances in relation to their surface fleet and their subsurface fleet, all of that is something that Australia brings to the table.
Jennifer, he clarified in the days that followed that he was talking about offering the US more cooperation and engagement on defence, not threatening to take away some of the things he referenced there. But it was a bit vague initially, wasn't it?
Yes, and tell that to the Europeans. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that Trump is not, he doesn't behave in the way that a logical person would. I mean, obviously we have a strong defence relationship with the US, but on the other hand, it's not as though we're spending nearly enough on defence ourselves to impress him. So I don't think, again, that is going to change at all, other than saying, remember us, we're always with you. But again, I'm not sure that will make much practical difference to an issue that he is so passionate about.
Well, I don't think they've left any room at all for negotiation. And just observing Trump over these last few years, The only numbers he understands are the ones that are preceded by dollar signs, and the others are poll ratings. So I think once his poll ratings really start to slide down into the 30s, he'll suddenly turn around and say, yep, all this tariff stuff has worked and now we can afford to ease off. I think that would be the only thing that might induce him to pull back.
I did speak to the former Prime Minister John Howard for the podcast this week about how Australia should approach all of this. He says we should keep calm and carry on, to borrow that famous British phrase. We absolutely should stick with the US as our main alliance partner. But when it comes to negotiating with Trump on how to get these tariffs removed, he was pretty adamant defence, national security should not be on the table at all.
Oh, no, I would never put that... I would always keep that separate. That's national security. And the idea that we would... What are we going to... We're going to wave our fists at the United States? Really? On defence? Given the history of our relationship?
You can watch that full conversation with the QR codes there, but a pretty clear and instinctive view. He wasn't aware of what Peter Dutton had been saying. And
I bet he wasn't.
No, Peter Dutton has since clarified that he's saying offering more. But Tom, even the idea that we'll buy more F-35s if you take the tariffs off, or we'll maintain your surface fleet ships. Is this the sort of thing that should be discussed in a trade negotiation?
Well, yeah, I mean, it raises the question as well of, again, when the direct cost of this to us is so small, why would you be offering anything up that's got a cost to Australia? And that I think is where Dutton made a bit of a misstep. You could understand the rhetorical point he thought he was making by coming out and saying, look, Albanese is a weak leader, I'm a strong leader, I could have got a better deal. But I think that proposition looks a bit unserious when you then ask the question of, OK, well, what are you offering that the Albanese government wasn't? Because the whole purpose of this for Trump, the word reciprocity was actually nonsense. The tariffs had nothing to do with reciprocal tariffs. He put out these grievance lists, the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, all the rest, essentially hoping that people would blink, grovel, offer him something on that list. Dutton said he won't do that either. But the question is, well, Albanese government wasn't willing to offer these things up. If you think you could get a deal just by restating exactly the same case in a nicer or more persuasive way, I'm not sure that passes muster.
Well, time to talk to the Nationals leader, David Littleproud, now. And to take us there, here was his reaction to the Trump tariffs.
We stand with the government in opposing this, but what we need is a relationship reset. We've got a Prime Minister that unfortunately can't even get a phone call with the President, and I sense that's probably because of the personal disparaging comments he's made about President Trump in the past. So we need to have a reset to explain to President Trump, particularly when you look about the tariffs he's imposed on beef. He's actually imposing that cost on his own people.
David Littleproud joining us from Cairns this morning. Thanks for being with us. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we just heard you there talk about the need for a relationship reset with the United States. What do you mean by that?
Well, obviously the Prime Minister's made disparaging comments about President Trump previously, and there's no way in the world that his advisors haven't dropped that in his ear somewhere along the line. And when you can't get a phone call or even a meeting in the lead up to what we could see was coming in terms of Liberation Day, and you see countries like Mexico and Canada that didn't get blanket tariffs, they still had tariffs put on particular industries, but there was some nuances in terms of the concessions that they were able to get. We have a compelling case, a more compelling case than what we did in 2018 when we got a carve-out. We actually did just drop a cheque for $800 million a couple of months ago for the first instalment on those Virginia-class submarines. And that's about the enhancement of the necessity and need for us to acquire more military hardware to protect our nation as these geopolitical threats continue. But it's about making sure that you can have respect, and it's not just about protecting brand Australia, it's actually taking a leadership role globally, being able to demonstrate to President Trump this is bad policy. It's bad policy for the United States, it's bad policy for Australia, but it's bad policy for the world, and we have an international responsibility to lead that, and because we have that relationship, we should be able to lean into it.
But to be clear, Canada and Mexico have got higher tariffs than Australia, and even the United Kingdom. I mean, Keir Starmer has a good relationship, it seems, with Trump, spoke to him on the phone, but he still copped the 10% tariff as well. Do you seriously think Australia could have avoided this?
Well, if you could pick the phone up and get it answered, or you could get in the front door of the White House. The Albanese government has been basically placid in their response to this. They haven't been forward-leaning in trying to even get that phone call when we could see what was coming and leverage the relationship and about that position that we are going to lean in very heavily because of the legacy that the former coalition government left with AUKUS to be able to defend ourselves, an island nation, and to have the military hardware that we're going to need. We're going to have to procure that from somewhere. We should be making sure we leverage every position as we did in 2018, but we've also got a global responsibility, David, to lead the world because we do have that unique relationship with the United States to make it clear to President Trump this is bad policy. The people of the United States are going to hurt from this. And while it only represents about 5% of our trade to the United States, it's actually what he's doing globally to our other trading partners that'll have a global impact. And you need leadership, you need calm, strong leadership, but you've got to be able to get in the door and you've got to be able to have the phone picked up.
So when you say we should leverage that defence relationship, are you saying we should buy more American kit? And is that rewarding Trump for doing this?
Well, we already are, David, and that's what I'm saying is that we should be able to leverage the fact that we've created this partnership with the United States and UK to keep peace in our region and that we are going to need the hardware that we don't have here in Australia. We're an island nation and those submarines, the technology that our submariners should have. We should be able to look the mums and dads of our submariners in the eye and tell them that they've got the best technology in the world. We're going to keep them safe with that. And we're also going to need missiles and F-35s to be able to defend our island nation. This threat is real, but you've got to be able to prove that you can defend yourself and you have those partnerships. And we're going to have to ramp up our spending with respect to defence to make sure that Australians can feel safe and that we keep peace in our region.
Shouldn't we buy the best missiles for Australia, the best equipment to protect our island nation, as you say, rather than respond to something like this from Donald Trump and say, OK, we'll buy your stuff because you've hit us with a tariff?
Well, we will buy the best, David, and this is more than just hardware. It's also the relationship on boots on the ground and military operations and enhancement about where there's mutual agreement but also mutual benefit. That's just common sense. That's how the world operates. You'd be naive to think otherwise. There's an opportunity for us to leverage that long-standing relationship with the United States of us standing shoulder to shoulder in their hour of need and our hour of need together to make sure that we don't just look after Australia, but we actually look after the rules-based order globally that has served the United States, Australia and the world well, and we should return to that as quickly as possible. You need to be able to get in that room.
Do you think some might say, though, that you're talking about rewarding a bully?
No, David. I think this is about understanding that we'll give our defence the best they need, but in other areas where we have resources to make sure, as you do with individual trade agreements already, in articulating those on a bilateral arrangement is leveraging your advantages to be able to get a better deal. That happens in international trade as we stand now, and the 16 free trade agreements that we put in place while we were in government actually leverage much of that, of being able to leverage our natural resources and the opportunities and the challenges that the world face.
I want to ask you about what this means for the global trading system. I mean, free trade has helped Australian farmers for decades and decades. How concerned are you about the system, the impact this has on the system that we've benefited from for so long?
Yeah, look, I think that, as I say, the United States accounts for about 5% of our trade, and the beef industry is the most exposed. But what doesn't make sense in any of this is the United States doesn't have the production system to produce the beef that's going into their Big Macs. This is a Big Mac tax that the people of the United States will feel in a very lived experience in the next 3 to 6 months because they are still going to have to import beef. But what the real impact will be is the impact on our other trading partners in Asia. And we saw it last time, and I was Agriculture Minister when President Trump imposed tariffs on China. What they did is they pivoted, and they pivoted into other markets. And when you look at the Australian dollar and where is it at the moment, Australian commodities look very attractive. But we also need to make sure that that leadership, and what Kevin Hogan, our Shadow Trade Minister, has said is that we need to pivot into the comprehensive Trans-Pacific partnership that we put in place that Labor said don't bother about with those other key economic partners, about trying to find new markets, better access, as well as engaging the EU again in giving us that opportunities. And I think the world will try and trade around the US as much as it can, and in commodities where it can, but particularly in food where it has to. And I think you'll see some perverse outcomes for US farmers in the long term. And I saw that play out last time, and it'll be that lived experience that I think will put pressure on President Trump, the lived experience, not just of their farmers, but their consumers down the track. But until then, we need strong leadership globally, and you've got to be able to get the phone picked up and a meeting taken to be able to do that. And Prime Minister Dutton will make a trip to the United States in his first 60 days to get that put through and to leverage our long-standing relationship, one that's predicated on respect and not one that has had disparaging remarks between any of the two.
I want to move on to some other issues. The Port of Darwin. Look, both the Prime Minister and the Opposition Leader are now saying that it should not be in Chinese hands. There's a bit of an argument over who got to this position first, but let me ask you why. Why should the Port of Darwin not be owned by the Chinese-owned land bridge?
Well, it's not owned, it's a lease, firstly, but it's a 99-year lease and it's close to a strategic military asset. And when the decision was previously made in 2015 by the Northern Territory government, the geopolitical environment was a lot different to what it is now. And it's continued to evolve and change. And when you get that advice, your responsibility as a government is to move with it.
So
and
what's the
to
advice?
make sure that you protect it. Well, obviously that's advice that both the government and Peter Dutton have been provided around the strategic importance of that asset. And there's a need for it, and that's why we've made that decision, and the Prime Minister rushed his decision on a phone call to Darwin ABC to catch up. But the reality is it is a key piece of real estate strategically for Australia and the Pacific in maintaining stability in our region.
It's your understanding there's some advice from an intelligence or security agency that this needs to happen?
Well, there is ongoing advice, David, about the evolving geopolitical threats that are coming to our region.
Have you seen it?
You only have to well, I think a Virgin pilot saw it, David. Thank God for him. He flew over that boat, remember? If it wasn't for Virgin, that Virgin captain, we probably would have been none the wiser. So it's that, I think the advice is pretty clear.
When Chinese warships that's made the decision up, is it, to take Port of Darwin off Landbridge?
This has been something that as a coalition we've been working towards for a long time, and making sure that we get the settings right and understanding the legislative opportunities that we could take to make this. The government has rushed simply to match it. It doesn't look as though they'd undertake any real undertakings to do this. It's only because we'd led on this, but it's more broadly about the geopolitical change to the environment in which we live in, and that's what your responsibility is if you want to be the government, is primarily to keep your people safe.
I want to turn to energy prices. Labor's today promising these 30% rebates on household batteries, save families up to $4,000 on a battery installation. David Littleproud, you were floating a similar sort of idea early last year. Do you support this sort of idea?
Well, you'll see the rest of our energy policy in the coming short period, in fact, well before the election date, so that you'll see that. But in the short term, not everyone can afford a battery, unfortunately, David. A poor old pensioner out there isn't going to be able to make up the other $8,000 to be able to pay for that. Someone renting isn't going to be able to help that. What we need to do is fix the fundamentals, and that is flood the market with gas to get Australian gas back into the grid. It was Anthony Albanese, that he was part of the Labor government, that actually allowed these companies to export our gas out without having a domestic gas reservation.
I'll come to gas, but are you saying you'll have some sort of rebate for solar and batteries as well?
There's no scoop today, David, but what you'll see in totality is an energy grid that's cheaper, that's $263 billion cheaper than an all-renewables approach, one that has been modelled by frontier economics that both the Coalition and the Labor Party use and trust. And for Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese to run around and say we have a $600 billion nuclear plant is wrong. It's actually costed at $331 billion, and those nuclear power plants are $120 billion.
Yeah, I will come to that. But just on batteries, you're not criticising this idea. It sounds like you might have something similar up your sleeve.
Well, what it's doing, David, and you wait till you see where our total policy is an admission that Anthony Albanese's not only not going to reach that $275 that he modelled, it's nowhere near, it's over $1,000 now, and he's got no hope of bringing it down, and it's only a select few that'll be able to afford the balance of that battery. What you've got to do is have the courage to lean in and fix the fundamentals, and if you keep going down the same path, they've already spent $7 billion on giving you an energy rebate. Ultimately, that money's going to run out. It's your money. You've got to have the courage to say the path that you are going down is not working. We should have an energy mix, not one that is an all renewables approach that no country of the industrial scale the size of Australia has gone down.
Let's talk about your gas plan. Peter Dutton initially said it would bring gas prices down from $14 to $10 a gigajoule. Now we're being told it'll save only a 15% for industry on their gas bills. Which is it?
Well, it will do both, David, and what you'll see, and we'll be announcing this modelling and about how this mechanism works. In effect, there's about 1,200 petajoules that are foundation contracts that we're not going to touch. We have to maintain our international relationships. What we're also have in our domestic grid at the moment is around 500 petajoules that comes from the domestic grid, but there's 300 petajoules that Anthony Albanese let keep going out on a boat rather than keeping for Australians when he was last in government, that we're saying about 50 to 100 petajoules of that should come into the domestic market to not just bring down grocery bills, because food processors are using it, and they'll get a significant reduction, and in terms of your overall energy bill, because it's about 6% of the market outside, or the total grid outside Northern Territory and Western Australia. So it'll be a smaller reduction on your energy bill, but it's about getting some short-term and quick relief, because you can get gas into the grid quicker than any other source. And there's about 140 petajoules that's sitting down in Victoria in the Gippsland. About 30 to 40 of that can be brought on with some investment, and that's why complementary to this is we've said we're going to build that capacity constraint mechanism to remove it, to build the infrastructure to get gas in, and that will then mean that it'll give confidence for gas companies to continue to drill and to get gas into our grid, but continue to export, because that also helps us pay our bills.
I mean, I guess the thing is, you know, fixing these problems, none of it's easy. You guys were in government for 9 years. You didn't do any of this. We still haven't seen the detail of how you'll do it.
I disagree with you on that.
Or you didn't do what you're talking about now.
I disagree with you on that, David. No,
this
David,
is a new idea,
if you do recall, gas-led. No, if you talk about a gas-led recovery, we didn't put in place mechanisms on gas companies because we could work with them to lift that supply when we needed to. And so what we're saying is that we need to leave a legacy of, no matter who's in government, to put in place an East Coast market mechanism that protects and gives Australians first crack at their own gas first.
So this is the same as
we get that.
So this is the same as the Morrison government's gas-led recovery approach. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's about making sure you're investing in gas, and that's why we're complementary of $1 billion in getting the capacity built up to get that domestic gas, particularly from Victoria.
The gas reservation idea, is that new, or are you saying this is not a new idea?
Well, now we're imposing a charge so that Australians get that 50 to 100 petajoules extra that we'll need until we get that peak amount of around 550 to 600 petajoules. Until that's put into the domestic grid, then there will be a charge for those spot cargo boats that go out.
So
until
what's
we
the
get
charge going to be?
We want to work collaboratively.
What's the charge?
Well, that's what you'll see. That's what you'll see as we announce this, along with other measures within our energy policy. As we've been very upfront around the modelling on our nuclear energy. We've been very upfront. That is the medium to long-term solution, but in the short term.
Can you just explain why we can't see the details of this charge on gas exports that you're talking about?
Well, as one of your panellists beautifully articulated last week, not too many people have been engaged. We're going to announce our policies when it's right and we get the best bang for buck.
But even Gina Reinhardt wants to see the detail on this. Industry's a bit concerned.
Well, look, industry are about making money, and we want them to make money. But what I want to do, and what Peter Dutton wants to do, is to look after the little guy, to look after the food processor that's had a 30-40% increase in their gas bill each year to be able to try and get your grocery bill down. You've got to, at some point, we've got to have the courage to fix the problems in this country, and we've got the resources to do it. But you can't be done with ideology, and we should have a mixed grid. And we should draw on our resources so Australians get first crack at it.
Look, just a few other things on nuclear. Some polls suggest there isn't a lot of support in the areas where you want to build the nuclear plants. Are you or is anyone going to these local areas to talk to locals about it?
Yeah, my own electorate, David, and I think if you want another proof point, go to the Western Australian election. The good people of Collie voted for the Liberal Party. Our polling shows very strongly that people that are going to host one of these plants have energy literacy higher than you and I, because nearly 80% of them will have a job in a transition across to a nuclear power plant. And regional Australia, we all want to reduce emissions, but I just say to people in capital cities, just understand what you're asking us to bear, the burden of having an all renewables approach. The turbines, the panels, the transmission lines is tearing up our prime agricultural land, your food security, and actually destroying the very native environment we're trying to protect, when we could have zero emissions technology, reuse the same transmission lines that are there, and it is $263 billion cheaper than an all renewables approach. Okay. And the reality is we should have a mixed grid, not put all our energy eggs in one basket, and that's just common sense. We just say to people, we want to reduce emissions, just understand what you're asking regional Australia to do, and we should have a say in it. And I can tell you those 7 sites, it's popular because they know they've got a future, they've got a job, not just for 15 years, but for 60 to 80 years.
On immigration, Peter Dutton's today announced plans to cut the foreign student intake by 80,000. What about working holiday makers? That's a big cohort of the net overseas migration, 63,000 came in last year. Would the coalition lower the number of working holiday makers?
Yeah, well, what you'll see is Dan Tehan and Peter will actually announce the total numbers, and I think it's important, Peter, that we look at it in totality. This is an important component that will feed into it. We've been very clear, be upfront about what our permanent migration will be, but there's a number of different actual visas, classes that need to be put into this so that there is oversight and clarity for everybody. What we want it to be is upfront, and we'll be very clear about, across all those visa sectors, about the numbers that we're looking at.
And you'll bring back the agriculture visa that was scrapped?
Yes, and that's one commitment we've already made, and we'll bring it back as we actually implemented it before we lost government, because it's important that regional Australians have that resource.
Just finally, David Littleproud, the floods in your part of Queensland and so much of Western Queensland. The PM was there yesterday. He's announced further support. Is it enough?
Look, I think it's a big start, and I got to say the bipartisanship and the support of the Queensland government, firstly on the radars, that's important. I heard near-death experiences last weekend in Quilpie from people in Adavale. They had no communication, they had no warning. The bomb had no warning to give them, but also this dog fencing, it's so important. You can't restock unless we put these fences back up, because they're just going to get chewed out. So I've been calling for it, and I do thank the Prime Minister, and I thank the Premier particularly, but also those mayors. Poor old Tractor Ferguson out there at Thargo, he's led a community, 220 people that are all living at an airport for nearly a week now. They're real heroes, our local mayors, and those people are strong, but we're just going to need to help them. I just say to everybody, give us a month and come out and visit us if you could. There's motels are beautiful, you don't need a caravan. The best way you can support us is give us a month to wash ourselves off and come out and spend $1 out there. It's the most beautiful part of our country.
All right, good advice. David Littleproud, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
All right, coming up, we'll be joined by Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister, shortly. I want to get back to the panel first, though. We're joined by Niki Savva once more, Tom Crowley and Jennifer Hewett. Just a couple of things. We will come to the energy debate, because there's a bit going on there this morning. But just on the foreign student caps, Niki, Peter Dutton was out early this morning. They're going to lower the foreign student numbers by 80,000 next year. That is a little further than what Labor's pledging to do, and there are arguments about the best way to do this. The universities won't like this at all, though. But this is pretty much consistent with what Peter Dutton's been indicating for some time.
Well, that's right. He started this debate more than a year ago now, and Labor moved to try and head that off by announcing its own cap. And in fact, Dutton voted against that, saying we'll do better.
I think this morning they said it didn't go to a vote, but they were clearly opposed to it.
They were clearly opposed, and now they've come out with this figure, which is not all that lower than what Labor has introduced. So it's kind of a bit of Tweedledum, Tweedledee kind of politics.
They both want to bring down those foreign student numbers.
They want to bring down the numbers, and, you know, they're both saying that this will increase the availability of housing. Now, hopefully that will happen, but will it?
Well, Tom, will it?
We don't know.
Well, I mean, I think, there is some argument about the number of international students having a particular role in kind of inner city rental markets. But as you asked David Littleproud about, another one of the things that's driving that is the working holiday makers. Irish and British backpackers got an extra year. There was a policy change there. That's what's meant that the cohort of that group in the country is a lot larger. Whereas international students, there was a big glut of sort of pent-up demand after COVID for people who couldn't come, who wanted to come. The suggestion is that that is starting to naturally come back down anyway. So maybe that will ameliorate the effect to some extent on the sector, but of course they'll be annoyed still.
Immigration has been a red hot issue though, here and in other countries. Will this have popular appeal?
I think it'll definitely have popular appeal. And I do think that the explosion in international student numbers was a really big mistake by universities. They, of course, said they had no choice because they didn't get any enough funding from government to make up the difference. But when you had in like our big universities, G8 universities like the University of Sydney, University of Melbourne, international students making up half the number, and of course that's average. In some courses was over 90%. It was completely unbalanced. And then you pound that with the impact on rising rents. And of course, I think that just really agitated the whole public. I think that's a big issue.
I think there's obviously an argument that some universities have gone way too far in relying on the foreign student numbers. But the flip side argument is, of course, that this is a big export earner for Australia. It's also a big soft diplomacy measure. People come here, spend a few years at uni. They're going to have an attachment to Australia for life, and that can really help us internationally, and particularly in this region as well. Anyway, they're both clearly going for deep cuts, but Peter Dutton wanted to get the edge there with a deeper cut. The Port of Darwin, Niki, this was a bit unseemly the other day. Peter Dutton was about to make an announcement. Anthony Albanese rings up Darwin Radio to get in first. He maybe had hinted at it a few days earlier. But that question about why does this need to happen, is it clear-cut?
Well, yeah, I think it's clear-cut. I mean, it was obviously a mistake from the very beginning. And I think Barack Obama made that pretty clear to the government at the time that it never should have happened. And then we've had this sort of to and fro from the major parties over some time about whether they should or whether they shouldn't.
And how to do it.
And Dutton, in fact, said yesterday that when he was Defence Minister, he got advice from the department that, it was okay, it should stay, and he accepted that advice. He didn't do anything about it.
As did the Prime Minister.
As did the Prime Minister. So, but it's all coming to a head now, obviously, with the circumnavigation of Australia by Chinese vessels. But can I just add one interesting little sidelight to this whole thing, because there's been a lot of finger pointing over who was going to announce it first and why did Albanese manage to jump in ahead. And the Dutton camp is pointing fingers at journos, saying that they were the ones who leaked it
to the other side. It's a big no-no.
To Albanese, but I'm told that it wasn't the journos, that Labor actually got it from someone on the Liberal side. Now, if that's true, and I'm told it's 100% right, that it's not part of any psyching out or mind games or anything, then I think that's a pretty bad sign for the Dutton camp.
Well, leaky ships. Now, I might come back to this, and I'm going to talk about it with Penny Wong as well, the Port of Darwin, but I just want to come back to the issue of the tariffs, because we were talking about the impact that it's going to have strategically in this region as well. I mean, take a look at some of our neighbours and the tariffs they've copped from the US. Japan, 24%, Vietnam, 46%, South Korea and Thailand, Indonesia, 32%. So, this will have a heavy impact on their economies, and this is where the concern comes in, that they're going to be drawn more closer to China as a result. Time to talk to the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, about this. And to take us there, here was the Prime Minister on this point, highlighting this strategic concern.
There's no doubt that the response on a range of issues, be it action on climate change as well as trade issues, will affect the strategic competition that's here in the region. There's no question that that will occur. And countries will have their own assessments of that. We've been expecting this decision.
Penny Wong, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you.
Can I start by asking you to spell out what this strategic concern is that the Prime Minister is talking about?
There's no doubt the world is changing. We've seen that. We've seen that in the very changed approach that the US administration under President Trump has to America's place in the world. And we know, as you said in your introduction, that this is going to affect Australia, it will affect our region. That's why it's so important for the government to have a very clear plan for these tariffs, which were unjustified and unwarranted, but a very clear plan on economic resilience and export diversification. And you saw the Prime Minister outlining that plan in stark contrast to what we saw from Peter Dutton.
But when we talk about what's happening in our region, clearly the Pacific are upset with Donald Trump's climate approach, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. There are the aid cuts and now this trade punishment in Southeast Asia in particular. Are you saying that this is all going to help China?
No, what I'm saying is the world is uncertain. We live in changing times, and that's why it's so important to have a government and a leader who makes the right calls. And what we did see this week, and what Australians saw, is that Peter Dutton's stubborn, he's arrogant, he always believes he knows best, and the problem is that leads him to make bad calls. You see that in his stubborn insistence on a deal with President Trump at whatever cost. You see that in a reckless and risky linking of defence into this trade dispute. And what this showed us was this is a man who makes bad calls, and this is a man who is a risk to this country when we face these uncertain times. What we need is clear, consistent, firm leadership that the Prime Minister is providing to invest in our relationships, to invest in Australia's resilience and economic and export diversification, and that's what we are doing.
I can see why you want to bring this back to the election contest here at the moment, fair enough, and we'll get to some of that. But just can I come back to what Donald Trump is doing in this region, what it means for us strategically? Is Donald Trump making us less safe?
There is no doubt that tariffs will have an impact on the global economy. There's no doubt that some of the countries in our region are amongst the hardest hit, and that we are realistic about that. And what I would say is that does affect US power in our region, which is why it is so US influence in our region, which is why it's so important for us to do what we are doing, which is investing in relationships, both strategic and economic, ensuring that we continue to deepen and broaden our defence and strategic relationships, including with our principal ally, the United States. That's why we are working so hard to shore up our relationships in the Pacific, which is why we are working so hard to shore up our relationships in Southeast Asia. Now, all of these are not on Peter Dutton's radar. That's the reality. OK,
you're a big defender of the rules-based order. You talk about it all the time. With what's happened over the last week, does that order still exist?
Well, there's certainly the US under President Trump has a very different role in the world and the global economy. We're realistic about that. But let's remember a couple of things. The first is, we have some agency here. We have some capacity to engage with other countries who also want to continue to see trade flow. We have a capacity to diversify our economic relationships. We know that US exports from Australia is about 5% of our exports, and that's why we've got to continue to grow our exports with other countries. India, which has become now our fourth largest export market, we see our Southeast Asian economic strategy, which I've talked about for the last couple of years.
Yes.
So important, and we're seeing that develop, and of course other trade agreements that we are in or pursuing.
But it is notable that you didn't answer whether the rules-based order still exists.
Well, look, of course it still exists, but it is under pressure. We're realistic about this. So the question is, how do you navigate that? And part of how you navigate that is by investing in your own economic resilience and by diversifying your economic relationships, which has been such an important part of what this government has done for the last 3 years.
Do we need to have a look at our alliances, our arrangements. A British parliamentary inquiry has just been launched into AUKUS. It will look at whether this is still on track amid geopolitical shifts. Do we need to have a similar review or rethink here?
2 points. As the Prime Minister said, our strategic relationship and our alliance with the United States is bigger than a bad decision, and these tariffs we think are a bad decision. The second point I'd make is AUKUS is critical to Australia's defence capability. That's why we are proceeding down this path, and it's also why the call for by Mr Dutton to link defence into a trade dispute is so risky and so reckless, as Prime Minister Howard himself pointed out. It's a bad call by someone who consistently thinks he knows best.
But do we stick with AUKUS no matter what Donald Trump does?
We stick with AUKUS because it's in Australia's national interests, as all defence decisions should be, as all economic decisions should be. I mean, we stick with AUKUS because the submarine capability is important to our national interests. And why is it important? And I think that's important to remember. If I can go to this, we want to see peace, stability and prosperity in our region. And we do that by using all arms of national power. We do that by utilising our economic power. And we should talk about critical minerals at some point. We do that by utilising our diplomacy to frame the calculus, to signal red lines, to both reassure and deter. And we do that with credible military deterrence. That is part of how you ensure that you maintain a peaceful, stable and prosperous regions where the risk and costs of conflict outweigh any potential benefits. That's what we have to focus on.
So let's talk about what is on the table in trying to convince Donald Trump to change his mind. Obviously, defence, you say, should not be on the table, but critical minerals clearly are. Can you just tell us about what is being negotiated?
Well, this has been discussed for some time. We know critical minerals are a strategic economic asset in today's world. Now, the Prime Minister said he announced that we would have a critical mineral strategic reserve, and he also said we would have more to say about that. So we will have more to say about this in the days and weeks ahead. But the broader point is that this is an asset in a world that is increasingly uncertain. We need to use all of our assets, all of our economic power, and critical minerals are amongst those.
I understand the details that are to come, but should we be thinking about this as Australia digging up the critical minerals, stockpiling them in a strategic reserve for the US to use as they wish?
David, I enjoy the fact that I understand the details are yet to come, and then you ask me questions about the details. But hang on, I do want to make this clear. No, we've made clear this is something Australia wants to do, the Australian government wants to do for Australia's interests. And we see this as a strategic economic asset.
But again, I mean, I asked David Littleproud this as well. Are we rewarding a bully here by giving Donald Trump the spectacular offer that he says he wants?
Well, we've talked about an Australian critical minerals reserve, a strategic reserve, but you know what would be what is not the way to deal with President Trump is to be prepared to put things on the table which are key to who we are and what it means to be Australian. This is the problem with Peter Dutton's stubborn insistence on trying to do a deal at any cost. I mean, we will not compromise on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. You know, we will not compromise on Australia's biosecurity. We saw the US Trade Representative in its assessment, which was provided to Congress, raise both of those issues, plus some of our digital regulation. We are not going to compromise on what it is to be Australian. And I think one of the things I was listening to Mr Littleproud, and one of the things that struck me when I was listening to him was they don't understand the extent to which the world has changed. They don't understand the extent to which the second Trump administration is not the same as the first. The second Trump administration regrets exemptions it gave and has not given exemptions to anyone. And yet you still have Peter Dutton and his colleagues, you know, stubbornly insisting that they could do a deal at any cost and recklessly insisting that we should play defence into a trade dispute.
Is there anything beyond critical minerals on the table?
Well, you know, we will continue to put our case, but if what is required of us, the sorts of things that the USTR, the US Trade Representative, was outlining, is that Australia's not going to be compromising on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme.
Let me turn to a few other issues, Foreign Minister. You've joined international calls for an independent inquiry into the killing of Palestinians, 15 Palestinian medics and emergency workers in Gaza. Some mobile phone footage has emerged overnight. I'm not sure if you've seen this. It apparently comes from one of those paramedics who was killed, and it appears to contradict what the Israeli Defence Force initially said about what had happened. What do you make of this?
Well, what I have said is there needs to be a full and thorough investigation into this, and what I have consistently said since the conflict in Gaza began and since the horrific events of October 7 with the terrorist attack by Hamas is that we want a ceasefire, we want hostages to be returned, and we want international law and international humanitarian law to be observed by all parties. Now, international humanitarian law requires, amongst other things, humanitarian workers to be protected, and that applies to everybody. And I have consistently said that applies to everybody. Unfortunately, tragically, Gaza is one of the most dangerous places in the world to be an aid worker. And we are working with other countries on a declaration for the protection of humanitarian personnel. It's something I've engaged with many countries on, because it is time that the world remembered and reaffirmed the commitment we all gave each other in the aftermath of World War II that we would protect humanitarian workers as well as civilians.
And on this incident, there is an IDF inquiry. The military's General Staff Command will run the inquiry. You're saying that's not good enough? It needs to be completely independent?
Well, there should be a full inquiry. It should be thorough. We want to see, the world wants to see, a proper, thorough inquiry. Now, we'll make an assessment of that, obviously, when we see what the Military Advocate General comes forward with.
Okay. The Port of Darwin, why should this not be in the hands of Chinese-owned land bridge?
Look, I think it's pretty clear that critical infrastructure in a world that is more contested, in a region which is more contested, critical infrastructure such as ports, airports and other critical infrastructure, you would want to be in Australian hands or in we would want in Australian hands. Now, the Prime Minister's been on record for a very long time as having concerns about the sale of the port. We've certainly been working on, what a sensible mechanism to return it to Australian hands would be, and that's what the Prime Minister has flagged.
Yet, about 18 months ago, the Prime Minister's department reviewed this. The report found, and I quote, "It was not necessary to cancel or vary the lease." And the Prime Minister made it clear at the time there wouldn't be an intervention or forced sale. What's changed?
Well, it also said we should continue to monitor, and what we have done since that time has been to engage with, for example, superannuation funds, and I think the Prime Minister has said that publicly, about what a prospective sale could look like and how we could give effect to that.
But why is the question here? Because that report was clear, it wasn't necessary. Is there new advice?
Well, there's the elected representatives of the country have made a clear decision that this is a piece of critical infrastructure that in the current circumstances we believe should be in Australian hands.
But is it based on any advice from any of the agencies?
Well, I think agencies both have spoken at length, as have others, about the circumstances in which we live, and that you need to ensure that your strategic resilience, part of that is economic, part of that is your military deterrence, and part of that is hardening your infrastructure. We've been clear about that.
The Prime Minister said yesterday this was a political decision. Is that right?
Political level decision. Yes, its elected representatives have made a call that in the current circumstances this piece of critical infrastructure should remain in Australian hands.
Batteries, the campaign announcement from Labor today, a 30% rebate on a household battery. You'll save up to $4,000 depending on the size of the battery. Look, it's still going to be out of reach, isn't it, for a lot of struggling families. Who's this going to benefit?
Well, we think, over out to 2030, about a million households. But can I tell you, the sort of mismatch that we're trying to address here is we've got a lot of people with solar on roofs, but not a lot of people with batteries to ensure they can make full utilisation of that power. We need to bridge that gap, and that's what this policy does. And let me say, Look, it's a policy that is a long way better than $600 billion for nuclear reactors, which is what Peter Dutton is promising, and which we know he will have to cut into Medicare to pay for.
Okay.
I mean, this is a bloke who'll cut everything
But just
except
on your
taxes.
policy, Penny Wong, those on the lowest incomes still won't be able to afford this, will they?
Well, it's not the only energy policy we have, and obviously you've seen energy rebates, and we know energy prices have been difficult. There's a whole range of reasons for that. One of them is the war in Ukraine, the effect on global energy prices. The other is nearly a decade of coalition government where we saw supply exit the system. And they haven't learned. I mean, this comes back to this man, Peter Dutton's stubbornness, like he always knows best. They haven't learned from their approach previously, and so now they've bowled up a policy which will cost $600 billion. I saw $600 billion. He's going to have to find the money for that. No, well, it's the Smart Energy Council number, not mine.
Okay.
But I want to make this point.
Numbers,
well, of course, let's see them, but for 4%. 4% of Australia's energy grid. Like, it's a bad deal. If it's such a good deal, I'm wondering why Peter Dutton didn't go to Collie and explain to people there why that's the site for the nuclear reactor that he wants for WA.
A final question on foreign student numbers. Peter Dutton's this morning announced that a coalition government would reduce the number by 80,000 next year. Is that something you would match?
No, well, I got to say, I had a wry smile to myself when I read that story, because I thought, this is the bloke who is now announcing a policy he opposed, because you remember he opposed our caps on students, and he's also a bloke who's announced a policy to buy back a port that he helped sell. So I think everybody knows what sort of risk Peter Dutton is.
So you wouldn't match the 80,000 cut?
Well, we've already put in place policies which seek to manage better the number of foreign students coming into Australia. He voted again. He opposed that. We've already put that in place.
But you won't go as far as he's going on?
We will proceed with the policy framework that Tony Burke and Jason Clare have announced, which is looking to reduce the number of foreign students, which has delivered that, and which Peter Dutton opposed.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong, thanks for joining us this morning.
Great to speak with you.
All right, a bit to explore there. Let's get back to the panel. We're joined once again by Niki Savva, Tom Crowley, Jennifer Hewett. Let's get into the energy space, because there's a bit going on there. The household battery one we just heard a bit more about there. Labor unapologetic. It says this is part of a suite of measures. But Niki, who's it going to benefit?
Well, obviously people who can afford to install solar panels in the first place, and then to be able to afford to buy the batteries. And there will be a lot of people who can do that, but also a lot who can't, like poorer people, pensioners and so forth.
Yeah, Tom, it will have appeal in the middle, you would think, won't it, for people who might have solar already, but the cost of a battery's just been too high.
Yeah, it's very significant. And look, it's part, as Penny Wong said, of a broader suite that includes working with stratas to get, more kind of batteries and solar panels in apartment complexes as well. So it's part of a broader thing. But I think also just clearly a recognition. I mean, when the coalition went after sort of fuel and Labor with its energy bill discount, that the need to talk about energy in the short term and those costs, the cost of living argument is still there.
Yeah, and look, if it's 1 million households that take it up, that's significant.
By 2030.
Yeah, by 2030 over the coming 5 years. And talking to David Littleproud earlier about this, the reason the Nats, or he, was advocating something similar was the idea that you'd need fewer large-scale renewable projects if everyone could have a solar and battery. That'd sort the problem.
Oh, well, can I just say, whatever happened to the idea of means testing in Australia? I mean, we now seem to have completely given up on that idea. And a lot of these policies, at a time when our spending is going up in real terms, like this, by 6% a year, and our debt is incredible, we are now going to do another thing with batteries, which is going to benefit basically upper middle class people. Fine. Is that how we spend?
So you reckon there should be some sort of income limit on this?
Well, but then of course, people aren't going to take it up because they're not going to be able to afford it. So it's not as though if you had so I just find it. Of course, it's kind of a great concept that people get more batteries, but the money involved is just, yet another example,
$2 billion.
of reckless spending.
And look at where it's being announced today. I think the Prime Minister's doing this in the seat of Griffith. They're trying to take that off Max Chandler-Mather, that seat held by the Greens right now. So, when you say the sort of cohort of voter that this is aimed at, that's it right there. On energy, though, Niki, the gas plan for the coalition, it's 10 days since Peter Dutton announced this in the budget reply. Again, we get a little bit more detail from David Littleproud talking about the charge that will be put on gas exporters if they're selling gas internationally rather than pumping it into the domestic market. But we still don't know what that charge will be, nor does the industry.
No, we don't know very much at all. And each day they keep saying, oh, well, you'll get the detail later. Well, it's getting very late in the campaign. People are going to start voting in about 2 weeks, a pre-poll. And this is a policy, as you say, that's been out there for well over a week. It seems half-baked. It seems something that they just pulled out of a hat and thought it was okay to go with because they wouldn't be tested on the detail, and they haven't been able to provide any detail.
Well, I think it's also very confusing, the detail. I mean, I don't want to get too complicated here. The gas market is an incredibly complex thing. And in fact, there are 3 LNG plants in Queensland. One of them's associated with Origin, one of them's associated with Shell, and one of them's associated with Santos. The only one that takes money out of the domestic market to fulfil its contracts is the one that is Santos. Yet they're not going to be affected by this because they don't have any extra to sell on the spot market. I mean, so the whole industry is going, well, what does all this mean? Quite apart from that, of course, it would take time to take effect. And I think this is part of the issue. Of course, gas is a good idea. More gas, I think, is a good idea. But a lot of it is state governments as well, and the fact that New South Wales and Victoria have refused to, allow or made it impossible to kind of develop things. But the main problem for Peter Dutton is nobody understands how this works, and it doesn't actually have an immediate impact.
Including Gina Reinhardt.
Yes, and the longer that you wait on this sort of thing as well, the more that frontbenchers get asked about it, the more they start to contradict each other. There's been a real muddle over this $14 to $10 thing, whether it means wholesale, whether it means that's a saving for consumers. Angus Taylor then seemed to say that those two were the same thing. They're in a real mess on this.
And on another policy front for the coalition, work from home, there does seem to be a bit of adjusting in the language around what they're talking about here. So a month ago, when this was announced by Jane Hume, the Shadow Finance Minister, the position was it will be an expectation of a Dutton Liberal government that all members of the APS, the public service, work from the office 5 days a week. Peter Dutton at the time was saying, well, if there's plenty of job sharing arrangements that women could take up, which is something quite different to working from home. But clearly, Niki, this saw a pretty immediate backlash. Liberals have felt it. A lot of people who do work from home who aren't in the public service worried that this would affect them. He's trying to clarify, no, I'm only talking about the public service, and I'm only now talking about those who are based in Canberra. And what's more, he says he's a big supporter of work from home.
I strongly support work from home. I've been very clear about that. And our policy doesn't have any impact in the private sector, doesn't have any impact on the public sector outside of Canberra.
He says Labor's been most unfair in scaring people about the impact of this. What's gone on, Niki?
Well, when it was first announced by Jane Hume on May 3, I think it was.
March 3, yep.
Liberal Party candidates were beside themselves. They were deluged by constituents, not only in Teal seats where it was playing very badly, but also in places like Western Sydney and seats like Robertson and Eden Monero, because since COVID, families have got very used to this way of running their lives and their work. And if you're trying to achieve a balance in life work, this is a very good way to do it. So they were horrified by it. And it's all very well now to say, well, we don't mean all public servants, we just mean those ones in Canberra. Nobody believes that. What people believe is that once it's in the public service, that it's not allowed, that it will quickly spread into private enterprise. They have no doubt about that.
But I mean, for example, the New South Wales Labor government has an idea has asked people to come back from working from home because they've decided it's not very efficient. I mean, I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say that more people should be expected to work from the office more days a week. It's why the private sector is trying it as well. Nobody's saying that it has to be 5 days a week, or
that's what they did say.
Did originally.
That's what they said.
But I think there is a general kind of agreement that just open slather, everybody can work from home 5 days a week. Has not been good for productivity. It's not been good for anything. That's why the private sector is trying to change it. But it's always a balance. And the thing is that I think that the opposition allowed themselves to get trapped into saying something dramatic, 5 days a week, and now of course they're being
the Productivity Commissioner Danielle Wood has said the sweet spot from a productivity point of view is the sort of half-half.
Yes.
3 days in the office, 2 days at home. But was it a misstep, Tom, to say 5 days a week back in the office?
Yeah, I think that, the way that it lands for a lot of families is as a cost of living issue, and I think that's part of why it's so red hot at the moment, and not just for women who are more likely to take advantage of the flexible work arrangements, but for their partners as well. That's what I'm hearing from a lot of people who are seeing this come up on the doors and saying, they thought it might just be a white-collar thing, but actually no. There are a lot of families where flexible work is what's keeping the show together, and I think what's bubbling along beneath this is that flexibility is the sort of, often we don't look at it directly, but it is the new frontier of the IR wars. There's a battle going on between employers and employees today over flexibility. Employers will make the argument that in extremis, it is bad for productivity. You probably can sort of bear that out, that if no one's ever coming into the office, it might be bad for productivity. You hear the argument from people, it was the same over the right to disconnect. There was a massive sort of unexpected generation war that broke out over that right to disconnect issue that the coalition originally thought was a winner, and then it backed right away from that as well. It's not talking about that anymore. And it's because even though employers and a lot of people in the business sector say, well, the balance after COVID has gone too far in one direction, there are a lot of people who've gotten used to that flexibility. They're very attached to it. It gets people going in a way that I think was underestimated.
And I do think the impact of Trump on this and what he's done to the public service in the US, again, plays badly for Dutton in the sense that it reinforces the idea that this can be taken too far.
Looks a little Trumpy. There was another moment this week where Peter Dutton perhaps went a bit too far, and that was in relation to where he'd like to live should he win the election.
We would live in Kirribilli. It's we love Sydney and love the harbour. It's a great city, and so yes, that's the answer.
Tom, John Howard, Scott Morrison both lived at Kirribilli House. They were both Sydney-based MPs with kids at school. This would be a little bit different for a Brisbane-based Prime Minister to choose Kirribilli House.
It would be, and it's sort of one of those awkward things. FM radio has plenty of traps for new players, things that sound like they're harmless, look different outside of context. But
He's
look,
been in politics for 20 years.
Well,
He's hardly
sure.
a new player.
I
It's
suppose
something
the first
you
week
should
of
have
the campaign.
expected.
No, look, that's true. But I think when it comes to, gaffes and slips and all that sort of thing on the campaign trail, I think the key question about whether they cut through is whether they relate to an existing niggling perception that people have about the leader. And I think that was where Albanese on the unemployment rate, he was a bit fuzzy and rambly at the best of times. And so that's why I think that really struck a chord. I think what Labor's sort of focus grouping has tended to find is that Peter Dutton being the kind of, money-making rich guy out of touch doesn't land as much with people as the idea of maybe is Dutton a bit reckless, is Dutton a bit of a loose cannon. That's where I think it's the Trump stuff that they'll think that they'll have probably more purchase than Mr Harbourside mentioned.
Yes, and that's what Penny Wong is obviously trying to. This is the counter to Albanese. The attacks on Albanese as a weak leader. They're now trying to say, well, he's reckless. He makes bad decisions, and
it's funny.
It's dangerous.
As Tom says, the things that cut through in a campaign often aren't the dry policy arguments, are they? It's like he's going to live in Kirribilli House, or Anthony Albanese falling off the stage and saying, I didn't fall, I stepped back. But on Kirribilli, Niki, did this one penetrate, do you think, into the disengaged voter land?
Oh, definitely. It is one of those things that cuts through because you don't have to, understand the numbers or the modelling or
policy.
That's right.
how many petajoules and all that kind of thing. What you got was him saying, yeah, of course I'd love to live in a harbourside mansion. And it sounded as if it was something that he had actually thought about. And then on the way through, he spat on Canberra. And okay, maybe the rest of Australia thinks that that is a good thing to do, but it is the nation's capital. And if you want to be Prime Minister and you don't want to live in Canberra or spend time in Canberra, find a job elsewhere.
Well, this is the link with the work from home.
This is the equivalent of Anthony Albanese buying his retirement house on the Central Coast, I think.
Yeah, right, he gets up there with that.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's a retirement thing, you know, and this is Dutton saying.
The problem with that was it signalled he had his eyes on retirement.
On retirement, but yeah.
But doesn't it sort of reflect as well how interesting it is, and just a reflection of how the campaign's gone in the first week, how much we're talking about the personality of Peter Dutton? It's funny in a way where we should have expected this to be the kind of cost of living referendum judging the government over the last 3 years. Maybe that's still what it will settle into. But instead, this mirrors so much the kind of personality referendum on Morrison that we had the last time around, that Labor certainly is seeking to portray it that way. I think it's kind of, now that we've had the weariness of cost of living coupled with a new reason for economic uncertainty, I think everyone's feeling a little bit unsettled. It's become a contest over whether Dutton can say,
I think it's a really
I'm
good
the
point.
strong man for tough times, or can Labor say he's a loose cannon for tough times?
No, I think it's a really good point, and I've been thinking about this too. Why this week, first week of the campaign, so many of the issues that have been in the debate have been around Peter Dutton. Is it because this term he's done a pretty good job of keeping the focus on Anthony Albanese and all the cost of living problems and failures and so on, the Voice and all of that? But now, once we're into the campaign, suddenly people are saying, well, OK, what's the alternative? And it's having a good look at Peter Dutton. And there was another moment that grabbed a fair bit of attention this week when Peter Dutton, talking about sounding Trumpy, started talking about the Federal Education Department, that he was asked in a Sky News pub test forum about wokeness in the classroom and what he'd do about it. And here's what he said.
Well, the Commonwealth Government doesn't own or run a school, and which is why people ask, well, why have we got a department of thousands and thousands of people in Canberra called the Education Department if we don't have a school and don't employ a teacher?
And this is, Trump has just done this executive order a couple of weeks ago to start dismantling the Federal Education Department, same sort of thing. They don't run a school. They do, as the government pointed out, a whole lot of other things. But are there dangers here for him in trying to talk to an audience that might be at risk of drifting off to Clive Palmer and trying to tell them, no, I'm attuned to your concerns. I'm going to deal with this wokeness in the classroom and so on?
Yeah, I do think there are kind of real problems with this, because again, it's a kind of question of nuance, which then gets lost in a kind of in a campaign. But also, I do think one of the reasons that there's been a focus on Dutton and it's kind of gone to personality is that their policies are very mediocre. Minimal rather. There's been very little that's actually cut through, and they have relied for quite successfully until now on just saying, look, we'll announce our policies, in good time, and in the meantime, look what a mess Labor's making. Well, the time for that is now kind of past, and you can't just keep saying, oh, we'll be announcing our policies shortly. That's all. That doesn't work anymore, and I think that's why people are getting nervous, and then that is completely compounded by the Trump effect, and I think that is definitely damaging Dutton.
What Libs are saying to me is that they've never seen a worse start to a Liberal Party campaign, and there seems to be a level of unpreparedness and maybe arrogance, because Dutton had spent all of last year basically capitalising on Albanese's mistakes, of which there were plenty, right? And he benefited greatly from that. And maybe there was a thinking that would continue during the campaign, that he would be able to go on Sky and say one thing and people wouldn't notice, and then he could say something else somewhere else. But it's a very different beast. A federal election campaign is a very, very different dynamic. You can't disappear for days on end like you used to before. You have to be able to answer questions about everything every single day, and you have to be prepared. And there doesn't seem to have been any of that kind of preparedness.
It also shows that, you know, as much as we talk about the fragmentation of media and the public today into different echo chambers, that there's still bleed when it comes to a federal election, that a message that might work really well for both the Sky News audience and sections of a sort of a right-wing online audience doesn't translate well, but, you know, people do hear it elsewhere. I mean, I think, you know, you're right about a lot of people talking about the weak start. There's a long way to go still. I think it's also worth pointing out that the first week was dominated so much by significant events, whereas the second week gives both parties a chance to reset, settle in and frame the conversation around something different. And although the direction of change is all shifting in Labor's direction, Labor people are still nervous about Melbourne.
Yeah, and does Dutton at least get points for the last few days, getting back onto cost of living and going to a petrol station finally and saying, you know, I'm going to cut your fuel excise, getting back to immigration, which, as we said, is a big issue for voters, and saying I'm going to do more on foreign students. Is he showing any improvement?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if he can stay on message about that for 2 weeks until you know, early voting begins, then maybe things shift back in his direction. Look, I think getting 20 seats to get to a majority was always, it was a very slim margin for error. Now, you know, people are talking more about kind of 10. Outside Victoria, I think it's kind of hard to make a case for more than half a dozen. So I think you'll see more and more. I think he's in Donnybrook for the second time possibly today. I could be wrong about that, and in Melbourne. So, you know, it'll all come down to that.
Can I just make one point about the Port of Dutton?
Yeah, sorry, Jennifer, yeah.
Sorry, the
Port of Dutton.
Port of Darwin. And that is, you saw Penny Wong kind of refuse to answer your repeated questions on what has changed. And I think it's very clearly what has changed. This is a symbolic idea, and they're both seized upon it. I mean, really.
It's a political level decision, Jennifer.
Yes, yes.
But yes, Dutton has improved in the last couple of days, but the constant during this campaign will be Donald Trump.
Yep.
So, as I said before, 3 leaders, right? So how each leader reacts to this, you know, beast that's been thrown into the middle of our election.
Challenging for politicians all around the world, no doubt about it. All right, our panel, Jennifer Hewett, Tom Crowley, Niki Savva, will be back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm photographer Mike Bowers. I'm talking pictures this morning with cartoonist for The Guardian, the one and only Fiona Katauskas, and a very warm welcome.
Good morning to you, Mike, and you're looking very campaign-full there.
Yeah, you too.
I know, it's the look.
High-vis is so hot right now, so in.
It's so in.
And we've had our first fake tradie scandal. Both the Herald and Guardian ran stories alleging that the tradie in the advertisement for Tim Wilson at Goldstein was actually one of his campaign volunteers.
It's all about the cosplay, Mike.
And they say a week is a long time in politics, and the campaign trail, they are here. I guess that's pork barrelling, baby kissing, high-vis, polls, gaff. Is this mud from the flood?
It can be whatever you want it to be, but this campaign trail map is kind of adaptable for any campaign at all.
And the democracy sausage here on May the 3rd.
Yes, you get a reward at the end.
You get a reward at the end. This is Amber, and they're at the St John of God Midland Public Hospital in WA. The Prime Minister here is showing us his baby skills.
It's such a cliche, but they really do.
Oh, yeah.
Whole babies. And see, I don't know, like, unless you're the mother, the baby might give you a bad review.
This is the Good Start Early Learning Centre in Croydon South in Victoria, and the candidate for Deakin here is Matt Gregg, and doing a little bit of reading here.
Yeah, what's that, the tale of the 3 little pork barrels?
This is Philomena in Downer in the ACT, and what a spread.
And I've got to say, those icing sugar-covered Greek biscuits, man, that is a big no-no. That is just, you do the slightest breath and it's all up in your face.
And then the requisite doorstop in the backyard under the Hills hoist.
Compositionally, it's a lovely thing.
Here is the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, of course, and they're in headspace here with Anne Rushton, the opposition spokesperson, and the candidate for Hawke.
Simone Cotton. These are the sit and chat earnestly about big issues kind of pictures.
Yes. James Brickwood got this lovely, be true, be brave, be proud.
Yeah, and you know that he just said, Anne, are you sure there's nothing woke in here?
This is from the subgroup of looking at plans, drawings and maps on an easel. They do love to have them outside because you can go from said plan or future drawing to where it's going to be.
Oh, and core flutes as well. It's a great time before an election, invest in core flutes.
Dean Alston from the West Australian. This is how you turn the Prime Minister into a personality.
Oh, I like that. That's an excellent pun.
If you've got a campaign quokka, you're a personality.
Oh.
Eagle scarf, Dockers shorts, nature relative positive message, high vis,
a Kubra hat.
Pick and a Kubra hat.
Yeah, and the R.M. Williams boots, of course, with the sock marks here.
Yeah. Megan Herbert seems to think the offerings thus far, the tax cut Band-Aid and the cheaper fool Band-Aid.
How about a third option?
Housing.
Yeah, with housing, broken bone. Well, if pain persists, see a spin doctor.
See a spin doctor immediately.
Oh, my eyes, my eyes. This cartoon there should have been a content warning.
My fellow public servants, obviously there will be some special exemptions from working from home ban. Greetings from Kirribilli, Australia's Mar-a-Lago.
If I was him, I wouldn't want to live in Canberra either, because as soon as he steps out his front gate, he's going to meet one of the 41,000 public servants that he's fired.
Fiona, Donald Trump called it Liberation Day, but the rest of the world viewed it as terrifying.
Yeah, completely terrifying.
Warren Brown seems to think that everyone else has been put in the tariffs bin, Liberation Day, as it's only really the USA land.
Yeah, well, that'll teach them, won't it? I know, it's a whole new level of they're with us or against us.
A beautiful David Rowe, Panto Pete versus the Marrickville Mauler. Sieta tariff.
He's behind you.
He's behind you. Matt Golding, in some positive news, our 5 weeks of depressingly negative, simplistic, chaotic and reactive election campaign
will be a welcome distraction
from the 10 weeks of a depressingly negative, simplistic, chaotic and reactive Trump presidency. It's been a bigly pleasure unpicking events this week.
It has been a week in high vis.
I'll let you do the honours.
Thank you, and back to you, David.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. Jennifer.
Well, we're talking about the need for Dutton to regain some stalled momentum, but in fact this week was going to determine whether the absolute carnage on stock markets around the world is going to continue, what that means about the prospect of a recession, which will automatically mean Australia, and I think it shows up, frankly, the kind of lack of policy substance and lack of reality about much of our domestic kind of campaigning talk.
Tom.
Casting forward a little bit, if Labor do win the election, I think one of the big questions next term, will they be tempted to start meddling with what super funds invest in? The stock market's taken a big whack out of super balances because of how much they're invested in America. As they look elsewhere, Labor's always been tempted. They talk about housing. Albanese this week talked about them buying the Port of Darwin. You open a real can of worms if you do that. Labor's often flirted with it. Will they go there next term?
Maybe they could dig up the critical minerals too while they're at it. Niki.
2 outstanding Australians died on Thursday night. One was Petro Georgiou, a true Liberal who always stood up and fought for what he believed in, no matter the cost, made an enormous contribution to Australian political life, and without whom we would not have SBS. The other was Peter Leonidas, a very kind, hard-working man without whom the Savva family would probably never have made it out here. So in English we would say rest in peace, and in Greek we would say Zoe Simas.
Well said. Now thoughts with all concerned. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Finally, a shout out to camera operator Gaith Nadir, who kept doing his job under fire on the campaign trail yesterday when Peter Dutton missed the mark, who said covering elections was easy. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Oh, go on him. Go on him. Yeah. No, that was... Oh, his sleeve open too. Oh, no. Thanks, appreciate it. We'll get you beer this afternoon.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.